the invisible engine of life.
My dear evergreen seniors, welcome back to our shared garden of wisdom.
Let me start with a small truth many gardeners miss. When a plant struggles, slow growth, tiny fruit, weak stems, we usually blame what we can see. Maybe the leaves look pale, maybe the soil looks dry, but the real story rarely happens above the ground.
The true answer is usually hidden below the surface.
Just a few inches beneath our feet lives a quiet, invisible world, one that works like an engine powering the entire plant. And here's something that surprises many people. With about $1 and a simple ingredient that may already be in your kitchen, you can stimulate root growth so dramatically that studies have shown plant biomass increases of nearly 30%.
No harsh chemicals. No expensive gadgets. Just a simple biological mixture that awakens a hidden workforce in the soil. Tiny helpers your plants have been waiting for all along.
Today, we're stepping into the gentle world of kitchen science, where an ordinary baking ingredient becomes a natural signal telling plants it's time to grow stronger and healthier.
And as we explore this little garden's secret, we might discover something meaningful for ourselves as well. Because whether we're talking about plants or people, true strength often begins in the places we cannot see.
So pour yourself a warm cup of tea, get comfortable, and let's uncover the invisible engine that could transform your garden with just one watering.
Are you ready?
Let's begin. Part 1. The tiny workers in your kitchen. Now, my dear evergreen seniors, let's open the door to a world so small that we rarely think about it, but powerful enough to change the health of your entire garden. Inside a single teaspoon of ordinary baker's yeast, the same one you might use to bake bread, there are millions of tiny living organisms. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than a soft beige powder.
Quiet, still, almost lifeless.
But the moment yeast meets warm water and just a little sugar, something remarkable begins.
It wakes up. These tiny organisms come to life and start a natural process called fermentation. While most people think of fermentation only in baking, what happens during this process can be incredibly valuable for plants. As yeast begins to work, it releases a variety of helpful compounds, B-complex vitamins, amino acids, and natural enzymes. These substances act like ready-made building materials that plants can easily use to grow new cells, repair damaged tissues, and strengthen their overall structure. It's almost like delivering construction supplies that are already prepared and ready for use. But there's another interesting detail many gardeners never hear about. Yeast naturally contains many of the essential minerals plants depend on. Elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and iron. These are the same nutrients many commercial fertilizers try to provide. The difference is in how yeast works. Chemical fertilizers often push nutrients into the plant quickly. Yeast, on the other hand, supports the natural balance between soil and roots. It helps plants make better use of what's already present in the soil, gently and more sustainably. And here's where things become even more fascinating. During fermentation, yeast can also produce natural compounds that behave similarly to plant growth hormones, such as auxins and cytokines. These compounds act like signals that encourage plants to grow. Auxins encourage roots to branch out and develop new tips underground.
Cytokinins help support growth in the leaves and stems above the soil.
Together, these signals create balance, a coordinated growth response that can turn an ordinary plant into a stronger, more productive one.
And this is only the beginning.
Because once these tiny organisms enter the soil, an even more interesting chain reaction begins, one that many gardeners have never discovered.
But we'll explore that in just a moment.
Part 2. Rhizophagy, the hidden feast beneath your garden.
My dear evergreen seniors, get ready for one of the most fascinating discoveries modern plant science has revealed.
For many years, we believed roots worked like simple drinking straws, quietly absorbing nutrients dissolved in the soil. The process seemed gentle and passive.
But scientists eventually discovered that this picture wasn't quite right.
Beneath the surface of your garden, something much more active is taking place. Something that feels less like sipping nutrients and more like a tiny, carefully controlled feast. Researchers call this process the rhizophagy cycle.
And once you understand it, the way you look at your plants may change forever.
Picture the very tips of a plant's roots. They may appear delicate, but they are surprisingly active. These root tips interact constantly with the living microbes in the soil.
When helpful microbes, like the yeast from our mixture, come close to these root tips, the plant doesn't simply absorb nutrients around them. Instead, it can draw the microbes themselves into its root cells.
Once inside, the plant releases small bursts of reactive oxygen. This process gently breaks down parts of the microbe, allowing the plant to extract valuable nutrients and growth compounds.
It's a remarkably precise system.
Quietly, efficiently, and continuously, plants gather what they need from these microscopic partners. But the story doesn't stop there. Some microbes survive this process and are released back into the soil through tiny root hairs. As they leave, they stimulate the plant to grow even more root hairs, creating new entry points for future nutrient exchanges. In other words, the plant and the microbes work together in a repeating cycle, a living partnership that continues again and again beneath the soil. This is why a yeast-based brew can be so effective. Instead of feeding plants with synthetic salts that quickly wash away, you are introducing living organisms that help fuel this natural biological system. And when that system becomes active, the roots respond dramatically.
They grow deeper.
They branch outward.
They explore more soil than ever before. Soon, the entire garden begins to feel more vibrant and alive. But this underground activity is only part of the story. Because in the next section, we'll discover another surprising benefit. One that can transform loose sandy soil into something that holds water and nutrients far more effectively. Let's continue. Part 3. EPS, Nature's Invisible Soil Glue.
Now, my dear evergreen seniors, let's talk about the soil itself, especially for those of you who garden in sandy or tired ground. If you've ever worked with sandy soil, you probably know the challenge. You water generously, yet the moisture disappears quickly.
You add nutrients, but they seem to wash away almost immediately. The soil simply doesn't hold on to what your plants need. But this is where our simple yeast mixture begins to do something quite remarkable. When yeast becomes active in the soil, it produces substances known as extracellular polymeric substances, often shortened to EPS. The scientific name may sound complicated, but the idea is wonderfully simple. EPS works like nature's own gentle glue. It helps bind tiny particles of sand and silt together, forming small clumps that scientists call soil aggregates. Think about the difference between loose beach sand and rich garden soil that holds together in your hand. That crumbly, healthy structure is created by natural biological processes like this. When soil begins forming these stable aggregates, everything changes. The ground starts behaving like a sponge. It absorbs water instead of letting it run away. It holds nutrients longer. And it creates tiny protected spaces where beneficial microbes and plant roots can thrive. For plants, this means a much more supportive environment. Roots stay surrounded by moisture longer. Nutrients remain available instead of washing away. And the soil structure becomes more resilient during heat or dry spells. Even during periods of intense sunlight or short droughts, this improved soil structure helps protect the root system and maintain healthier growth. In fact, scientific studies have shown that these natural microbial substances can significantly improve the survival and growth of young plants, even in dry or semi-arid soils where gardening is often difficult. It reminds us of an important truth many gardeners discover over time. Sometimes success in the garden isn't only about strength. Often it's about creating the right support system beneath the surface. Perhaps there's a gentle lesson here for all of us. In the difficult seasons of life, what carries us forward is rarely force or perfection. More often, it's the quiet supports that hold us steady, our daily routines, the people we care about, our communities, and the resilience we slowly build over time. Just like healthy soil, we grow best when something beneath us is strong and dependable. And thanks to this natural bioglue created by living microbes, your garden can finally gain that kind of foundation. Now let's continue, because the simple recipe that brings all of this to life is easier than you might think. Part 4. The Evergreen Recipe. Bringing it to life. Now that you've met the tiny workers and the hidden systems beneath your soil, my dear Evergreen seniors, it's time to put this knowledge into action in your own garden. The wonderful thing about working with living biology is that it doesn't demand complicated equipment. It simply asks for a little care and attention. When you treat living things gently, they often reward you with abundance. So here is the simple evergreen recipe, a method many gardeners overlook, yet one that can awaken a plant's root system surprisingly quickly. Start with 1 liter of lukewarm water. This detail matters more than most people realize. If the water is too hot, the yeast won't survive. If it's too cold, the yeast will remain inactive. The goal is a gentle warmth, roughly the temperature of your hand, around 105 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, 40 to 46 degrees Celsius. Next, add 2 tablespoons of dry baker's yeast, about 20 grams, and 1 teaspoon of sugar. The sugar is not meant to feed the plant. Instead, it acts as a starter fuel for the yeast, encouraging it to wake up, multiply, and begin its natural activity.
Stir the mixture well until everything dissolves.
Then cover the container loosely with a cloth or place the lid lightly on top. This keeps sunlight away while still allowing the mixture to breathe. It's important not to seal the container tightly. As the yeast becomes active, it produces carbon dioxide gas. If the container is sealed,
pressure can build up quickly. Allowing airflow keeps the process safe and natural.
After about 30 to 40 minutes, you should notice a layer of foam forming on the surface. That soft foam is a good sign. It means the yeast has awakened and is actively working. But there is one important step that should never be skipped. Dilution. Take the 1 liter of yeast mixture and combine it with 10 liters of clean water. This 1:10 dilution is important because the concentrate can be too strong for young roots. Proper dilution ensures the mixture supports plant growth instead of stressing delicate tissues. Once diluted, water your plants gently around the base where the roots are located. Many garden plants respond especially well, including tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, and strawberries. For best results, use the mixture at key stages. When seedlings have just established.
During the flowering stage,
When fruits begin to form.
There's one final thing to remember.
This mixture is alive, which means it doesn't store well. It's best used within a few hours while the yeast is still active. Think of it as a fresh tonic for your garden, something prepared and used on the same day. And perhaps it reminds us of a larger truth as well. Growth rarely comes from force. It comes from good timing, gentle care, and the right conditions coming together at just the right moment. Part 5. Real stories and surprising results. By now, my dear evergreen seniors, you may be wondering the same thing many gardeners ask when they first hear about this simple method. Does it really work? Interestingly, the numbers tell an encouraging story. In controlled greenhouse experiments, plants treated with simple yeast solutions have shown root biomass increases approaching 30%. Think about what that means below the soil. 30% more roots means a stronger foundation, greater access to nutrients, and a much wider reach for water in the soil. And the benefits don't stop there. Some studies have also reported fruit yields increasing by roughly 20 to 28%, depending on the crop and growing conditions. These results aren't magical claims. They are simply examples of what can happen when natural biological processes are supported rather than ignored. But sometimes the most memorable lessons come from everyday gardens. One story often shared among gardeners involves a man named Joe who was tending his late summer tomato plants. By that point in the season, the plants looked exhausted. The leaves had started to yellow, the stems drooped like tired shoulders, and the blossoms refused to open. To most people, the harvest season seemed finished. But Joe decided to try one last gentle experiment. It was the kind of plant most of us walk past and quietly think, maybe next year. But instead of pulling the tomatoes out, Joe decided to try the yeast brew. Nothing complicated, nothing expensive. Just water, a little warmth, and a teaspoon of living yeast. Within a few days, something remarkable began to happen. Near the surface of the soil, tiny white feeder roots started appearing, as if the plant had suddenly remembered how to grow again. By the end of the week, the stems looked stronger and more upright. And by the end of the month, those tomatoes that once seemed like a lost cause were producing fruit again, enough to fill a basket. Nearly 4 pounds from plants Joe had almost given up on. Stories like this remind us of one of the most surprising truths about yeast. It doesn't just support plant growth. It can also help plants protect themselves.
Because yeast is a harmless type of fungus, it naturally competes with harmful fungi that cause problems like mold, blight, and rot. When you apply a living yeast mixture to the soil or plants, it introduces beneficial organisms that occupy space and resources, making it harder for harmful pathogens to take hold.